I. So much has happened in the past year that you might have already forgotten this, but back in April, Donald Trump was on trial in Manhattan criminal court, and it was a really exciting time because it seemed like this might be it, that justice would finally be served. So the judge said there were no cameras allowed in the courtroom, so you couldn't watch on TV. But I read an article that said every day there were a certain number of seats reserved in the courtroom for members of the public. So I am at a moment in my life where I don't get to do fun things. I have 2 little kids, no childcare, work from home, and I'm not complaining. It's just a fact. I don't get to do fun things. And sometimes that sucks, and I get annoyed, and I felt like I deserved. So one night I told my husband, I said, Teddy, you're not gonna like this, but tomorrow you're gonna be on your own all day long because I'm going to the Trump trial. And he said, what are you talking about? You can't just go to the Trump trial. And I pulled out my phone, I showed him the article that said I could. And he was like, that line is going to be insane. You're never going to get in. And I was like, I know it's going to be crazy. That's why I'm setting my alarm for 3 a.m. So I set my alarm for 3 a.m. If you've ever done that before, it's like hard to fall asleep because you're like, oh my God, you got to fall asleep. And then I'm like, but what if I don't hear the alarm? What if I wake up and I just don't care because I'm so tired? So I was just like, fuck it. I got up, got dressed, and headed out into the night. I arrived at 100 Center Street, that's the Manhattan Criminal Court, shortly after 1 a.m. And for a moment, it seemed like I was the first one there. But then I noticed a little group of people gathered. There's this little park across the street, and it turned out they were there for the same reason. A guy came over to me, and he wrote my name down in this little book because he was keeping a record of who arrived when. So in the morning when the gates opened, we'd all know who got in first. He told me I was number 18. So there's a certain kind of person who's willing to commit to spending an entire night in the park for a chance of getting into a trial. And this was an eccentric group. It was also pretty eclectic. There was old, young, New Yorkers, Southerners, political junkies, conspiracy theorists, lawyers, homeless people. We were all in this together, and there was a sense of camaraderie, and it was kind of like a jovial social atmosphere. I made a lot of friends that night, including John. So John's an interesting guy. He's really smart, really well-read, lived in his car, and he did this thing. It was so clever. He would drive to like popular neighborhoods in Manhattan, park, wait for another car to come along looking for a parking spot, roll down his window, and offer to sell them the spot. And I thought that was so clever, and I told him, and he was like, yeah, well, I am famous. Google parking pirate. And I did, and sure enough, there's like a whole article about him in the New York Post. I was really impressed with John. And I started talking about myself, my own life, and how like I never really get to go out, and this was like the most fun, exciting thing I've done in a long, long, long time. And John looked kind of like sad for me, and he was like, what number are you? And I told him I'm number 18. So John was one of a handful of people who, at this point the trial had been going on for several weeks. John had been out here every single night. So he knew how it all worked, and the number of people they let in each day fluctuated. And he told me, like, 18 is, like, not, there's a chance you'll get in. And I must have looked really sad, because then John said, I'll trade numbers with you. And John was number 6, and I said, are you kidding me? You would do that for me? That is so, and he was like, I can tell you're a really good person, and I will do that for you for $100. $100 for a seat at the Trump trial? That sounded like a deal to me. And so I'm about to like pay him via Venmo. His handle is Parking Pirate. And then he's like, you know what, just hold off on the whole interaction for now. Like, I trust you. I can tell your word is good. We'll deal with the money part later. So I'm having a good time out in this park, making new friends. And around 5 a.m., a whole new wave of people arrive, and they are not like us. You can tell just from looking at these people, they would never spend the night in a park. they're all rusted and like kempt, and they come in pairs of 2 and 3 because they're the type of people that would never do something alone. Like they got to have a buddy with them. And they come in and they're like, we're here for the Trump trial. Where do we go? And I got to sit back and watch as some regulars explains, like, we were all here for the Trump trial, and they were in the back of the line, and the chances of them getting in were not great. And these people did not like hearing that. There's this one woman who looked especially put out, and I noticed her talking to John, and I approached, and I could hear, and like, he was offering to sell her his spot that he'd already sold, and she was like, $200, $300, I'll give you $400. And he saw me like listening to this, and he was like, oh, whoops, I forgot I already sold it to that lady. And she looks at me with just like pure hatred in her eyes. And John was like, well, listen, she's got a really hard life. She's got 2 little kids, and like babysitting is like really expensive now, so she never gets to go. And the woman is just like not moved by my sob story at all. She's like, well, I've got no time either. And at this point, John randomly announces that he's running for Congress and asks if we would sign his petition to get his name on the ballot. And we're both like, yeah, I'll sign it. So she signs first, and then she passes me the clipboard, and I see her name. And it's a name I recognize because it's the name of a famous author who I recently emailed to ask to blurb my new novel. Because when you're a no-name writer, the publishing house makes you email a famous writer and ask for a blurb, and it's completely humiliating because they almost always say no. But this woman not only said yes, she wrote me the nicest blurb I've ever gotten. So I just come out and tell her like who I am and that I know, and immediately like our whole dynamic just changes, and we're best friends, and we're laughing and hugging, and we're like, what are the odds? This is such a crazy New York story coincidence. And then I'm like, you know what? You did me this nice thing. The spot is yours. And she was like, no. You've been out here all night, and you have 2 little kids. It's yours. And I was like, it's yours. And finally, she's like, okay, if you insist. So she gets John's spot. And meanwhile, we have like 4 hours to go until the trial starts. We sit on this bench away from people. Normally, I'd be way too neurotic and socially anxious to talk to her, but lack of sleep is sort of like alcohol for me. So I'm doing okay. We're sitting on the bench talking like 2 old friends, and the sun starts to rise, and the whole scene feels just like kind of surreal and magical. And then the press trickles in, and like, oh my God, there's Lawrence O'Donnell, there's Maggie Haberman. It's so exciting. The press, they get to go in before us, and around 7:30, the members of the public like physically stand and line up at the gate according to the order. The man with the notebook made sure everyone was in the right spot, except for the author who got the spot that she had bought. And the way it works is finally a court marshal comes out, but instead of taking like however many people they're planning to bring in that day, he takes people in small batches. So it's like the suspense is just terrible because he'll come out and take 2 or 3 people in, and we'll all be waiting, and then he'll come back out and take more, and then it's unclear when he's going to stop coming back out, and like when it's going to stop. Finally, I'm slowly inching my way up. Finally, I'm the first in line at the gate, meaning next time the marshal comes out, I'm getting in. But this time the marshal does not come back out. And it slowly dawns on me that I've spent an entire fucking night in the park for nothing, and now I have to go back home to my bratty, whiny kids, and I told you so husband, and function on 0 sleep. My self-pity is like so acute, but it's also, there's like resentment because I'm thinking of the famous author who not only gets to be a famous author, but is inside the court sitting in what should have and could have been my seat. And I'm about to give up and go to the subway when all of a sudden the court doors open one more time. And this time it's the famous author who comes out. Okay, so remember I told you up front the judge said no cameras in the courtroom? Well, that applies to people like with their phones. And the famous author like got caught by a guard taking a picture, and they kicked her out, which meant there is room for one more. which is how I got a seat at the Trump trial. And it was the first day of Michael Cohen's testimony. And he was amazing. He just got up and he just said one damning thing about Trump after another. And he's also like a really funny guy. And there were moments where like everyone was laughing. The whole courthouse was just like in stitches, except for Donald, who's just sitting there. And he wasn't allowed to talk. He just had to sit there and take it. And you know that look that he gets on his face when he just can't believe this is happening to him, like a petulant child? Well, I got to see that look live. And it was a really fun thing. Thank you.
Kate Greathead, everybody.